Okay, so welcome to this presentation on Chartered Statistician Revalidation, which aims to pull together information on the revalidation process, and in doing so, hopefully answer any questions you may have about the process in general and how it affects you in particular. My name is Trevor Lewis, and I serve on the Professional Affairs Committee, which is the body in the RSS that has designed the revalidation process and is responsible for its implementation. Like all members of the Professional Affairs Committee, I'm a Chartered Statistician, and I'm also a Chartered Scientist. My career as a statistician has included 8 years in academia, 22 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and most recently 13 years working as an independent statistical consultant. In the presentation today, I will cover both processes being undertaken this year for Chartered Statisticians who have a revalidation date of the 1st of January 2018. That is the process for statisticians who do not also hold the Chartered Scientist CSci award, and the separate process for those who also hold the CSci award. Recall, Chartered Scientist is an award of the Science Council, which the RSS has been licensed to offer since 2008. As already mentioned, please raise questions using the Q&A interface on the web conferencing screen during the presentation, and I will either try to incorporate responding to the question in my presentation, or at the end of the presentation raise your questions either through the Q&A interface or verbally over the phone line. Okay, moving to slide 2 then. The outline of the presentation is shown on this slide. We will start with an overview of revalidation for the CStat and CSci awards. We will then go into some detail on the revalidation process being adopted in 2017 for the cohort who have a revalidation date of the 1st of January 2018, highlighting the distinction between the process for those CStats not holding the CSci award, which for shorthand during the presentation we will refer to as the CStat revalidation process, and also the process for those CStats who also hold the CSci award, which for shorthand we will refer to as the CSci revalidation process. You may recall we announced the introduction of revalidation for CStat at the beginning of 2012, with the first cohort undergoing revalidation in 2014. So we will summarize the outcome of the first 3 cohorts to go through the revalidation process in 2014, 15, and 16. Hopefully this will give a sense of how revalidation operates and the possible outcomes for those members involved in the process. Revalidation is based largely on continuing professional development. So we will then say a little about the recording and scope of CPD, and this is the aspect about which most questions are raised. Finally, we will cover the support materials that are available to help you with maintaining a record of your CPD, ensuring that your CPD is supportive of your career development, and ensuring that you understand the requirements of revalidation. Moving to slide 3, in order to give an overview of CStat and CSci revalidation processes, we will cover the following 5 questions. What is revalidation? Who needs to undertake revalidation? Why did we introduce revalidation for CStat? What is the basis of revalidation? And how does the CStat revalidation 5-year cycle operate? Okay. So moving to slide 4, What is revalidation? Revalidation is the process to be successfully completed in order to retain CStat professionally active status or CSci status. Sometimes such a process is referred to as renewal or reaccreditation, but the RSS chose the alternative term, revalidation. The aim is to confirm maintenance of professional standards by declaration or by providing evidence. And revalidation is a form of professional appraisal carried out by the society. In this respect, you may want to compare it with the performance appraisal carried out by an employer. The focus of revalidation is professionalism in your working life, whereas the focus of an employer's performance appraisal is the achievement of goals and the development of skills and knowledge in support of goal delivery. Now, by professionalism, we're focusing on being trustworthy, ethical, up-to-date and competent, which is a shorthand for the approach to professional life, which is codified in the society's Code of Conduct. On slide 5, we just clarify who needs to undertake revalidation. It is the professionally active Chartered Statisticians. So let's say a little bit about the exceptions. That is, those who do not participate in the standard CStat revalidation process. So first of all, we should note that those professionally active Chartered Statisticians who also hold the Chartered Scientist Award undertake the Science Council's annual revalidation process, rather than the Chartered Statistician revalidation process, which runs on a 5-yearly cycle. Successful completion of the Science Council process, which is administered by the RSS, serves the needs for maintaining both CSci and CStat awards. This is the process referred to earlier as the CSci revalidation process. Moving down to the second bullet on the slide, for those on a career break or with extenuating circumstances, revalidation may be deferred. Each case is treated on its merits, but in general, deferment may be the best course of action if the career break or extenuating circumstances cover a period including a substantial part of the last 12 months. The third bullet, for those permanently required or those who have had a permanent career change away from statistics, there is no need to undertake revalidation in order to retain CStat status, although in this case, the professional register will indicate that you are no longer professionally active as a statistician. And finally, those professionally qualified fellows who retained the professional qualifications of the Institute of Statisticians at the time of the merger with the Royal Statistical Society in 1993, they do not need to undertake revalidation to retain the MIS and FIS awards. That's member and fellow of the Institute. Moving on then to slide 6, we cover why we introduced revalidation for CStat in 2012. Fundamentally, it was a key part of our strategy to raise the status and the value of the award both to those holding the award and to the beneficiaries of their work, be they employers, clients, funders, colleagues, or students. Specifically, revalidation increases the credibility of CStat as a professional award, as it says something about your capability today rather than at the time you originally received the award. This view was expressed in a number of discussions held with employers. It also reflects trends in continuing professional development policy of professional bodies, with a move from policies that were voluntary to mandated approaches that are monitored. Recall that the CPD policy of the Society has been mandatory for professionally qualified fellows since its introduction in 2004. So revalidation is introducing monitoring of an existing mandated policy. And finally, our prior experience with the Chartered Scientist revalidation process confirmed in our minds the benefits of such a process and our ability to manage an efficient and effective process for our members. Now, slide 7 indicates the basis of the revalidation process, and that it is the adherence to the Code of Conduct and compliance with the CPD policy of the Society. The former being confirmed primarily by declaration, whereas we will ask for evidence for the latter. Now, the Code of Conduct was put in place in 1993 and has been mandated for Chartered Statisticians since that date, and it was revised in 2014. There is a phrase in the original code which states, "Fellows shall seek to upgrade their professional knowledge and skill and shall maintain awareness of technological developments, procedures and standards which are relevant to their field." And this was expanded upon by the CPD policy of the Society, which was introduced in 2004 and revised in 2009. We will come back to say more about the CPD policy later in the presentation, and we will also give links to the Code of Conduct and the CPD policy from the RSS website towards the end of the presentation. So finally, in this overview of the revalidation approach, slide 8 shows a schematic of the 5-year cycle for the standard CStat revalidation process. The expectation is that in compliance with the CPD policy, Chartered Statisticians will prepare a CPD summary in each year. Now, for most members, the CPD summary will serve multiple purposes. So as well as satisfying the requirements for the CPD policy of the Society and hence their revalidation needs, it will also serve to support their employer's appraisal process and be a part of their up-to-date CV and professional profile and support their development and career planning. Although you will prepare a CPD summary each year, you should not submit anything to the Society until you receive a request at the beginning of year 5. And for those of you with a revalidation date of the 1st of January 2018, then 2017 is your year 5. So this talks about the CStat revalidation process. Note that for the annual CSci revalidation process, in essence, every year is a year 5. Moving to slide 9, you will see a breakdown of the revalidation activities this year for those of you with a revalidation date of the 1st of January 2018. So note that the first column gives the list of activities in the revalidation process. The second column gives the dates for the process for the CStats who do not hold the CSci award and for whom this is year 5 of the 5-year revalidation cycle. And the third column gives the dates for the process for those holding both CStat and CSci awards who are subject to the annual CSci revalidation process. You will notice that the CStat revalidation process takes place in the first half of the year and the CSci revalidation process takes place in the second half of the year. So going through the common set of activities for both processes, so this is focusing on the similarities of the processes, the differences we will deal with in detail later on. So in January, you will have received an email outlining the precise program of revalidation activities and a link to information on the RSS website. By email, you will all be alerted to the need to make an initial submission, which will involve making a choice of one of 3 options and providing some basic information. For most, this will be all you need to submit. Then feedback on this submission will be provided, including an indication of whether you've been selected for audit. Now, the selection of members for audit will be in part risk-based and in part random selection. We may vary the percent selected for audit, but typically we select between 10 and 15%. Those selected for audit will be notified and will be required to make their audit submission by the deadline stated, and the panel of assessors will then meet and provide specific feedback on the audit submission to those selected for audit. Note that only those activities highlighted in a reddish colour on the slide require members to do work. And I would estimate that the amount of work needed, for example, if you're not selected for audit, might be as little as 10 minutes or an hour if you need to bring your CPD summary into shape. If you're selected for audit, you may need to commit a couple of hours in order to pull together the submission. Now, hopefully these last 5 or 6 slides have given an overview of the general CStat and CSci revalidation processes. We will now focus on the detail of the CStat revalidation process to be carried out this year, and then comment on the differences between this process and the CSci revalidation process. So if you are one of the members who holds both awards and are going through revalidation, then virtually everything we will cover in the next few slides also applies to you, but the specific differences I'll summarise when we've been through the process in detail. So to slide 10, and this is simply a repeat of the previous slide with the CStat revalidation column highlighted. So the dates for this process are as follows. The January email not only outlined the process, but it also served to initiate the process and requested a choice of one of 3 options, option A, B, or C, and we'll talk about those in a moment. Although we give you until the end of March to respond, it is best to respond as soon as possible so that this request doesn't get lost in your to-do list. During April, we will respond and indicate whether you've been selected for audit. And if you're not selected for audit, then the process for you is complete. For those selected for audit, you will be given precise information on what is required to be submitted. You'll be directed to the support materials which might be helpful, and you'll be given the deadline for submission of the end of June. The panel of assessors meet over the summer and will feed back the outcome of the audit assessment by early September at the latest. So now let's move on to say a little more about the initial submission and the option choices available, and then we'll move on to talk about the audit process. So, slide 11 briefly describes the 3 options that members are asked to choose from in their initial submission. So option A, where you would choose if you are willing to make the declaration of being professionally active, complying with the CPD policy, adhering to the Code of Conduct, and returning a CPD summary for 2016. Option B, you would choose if you wish to continue to hold the CStat award, but cannot make the declaration because of either a career break, extenuating circumstances, or a recent career change or retirement. And option C you would choose if you do not wish to revalidate. So we'll look at in more detail now at each of these options and the information that would have been sent to you in an email. So slide 12 describes option A. And there are 3 points to this option, and so let me read through the option statement. I would like to revalidate and continue to hold the Chartered Statistician Award from the 1st of January 2018 until my next revalidation date. I affirm that I will continue to be professionally active, comply with the RSS CPD policy, and adhere to the Code of Conduct. If my professional circumstances change such that I am not able to fulfill the above obligations, then I will contact the Society immediately. And then I attach my CPD summary for the calendar year 2016 with my reply. Remember to, my sort of comment that I would make here is to remember to label your summary with your surname and membership number so that it can be readily identified as yours. We will be dealing with about 60 in this year's CStat revalidation process. So as indicated on the slide, if you select this option, you may be selected for audit and be required to submit further information about your professional experience and development from 2013 to 2016. You'll be notified whether you have been selected for audit during April. Okay, the next slide then looks at option B. So again, reading the option statement, I wish to continue to hold my Chartered Statistician. However, due to a career break, extenuating circumstances, a career change or retirement, I am unable to make the declaration described in option A. Now, as indicated on the slide, if you select this option, then we would like you to provide a brief explanation of your circumstances. You should also note that guidance allows the Society the discretion to defer revalidation for up to 3 years in cases of a career break or extenuating circumstances. And in the case of permanent career change or retirement from professional activity, your Chartered Statistician status can be retained and revalidation is no longer required. But if you select this option, your entry on the professional register will reflect the fact that you are not professionally active as a statistician. Maybe I should try and clarify at this point what is meant by retirement in this context. It means that you cease to be professionally active. So if you are performing a role that requires you to keep your knowledge and competence up to date, then you would not be considered retired. It does not need to be a full-time or paid work, and so members who are engaged in volunteering, outreach or consultancy, for example, should consider themselves to be professionally active and undertake relevant CPD. In contrast, someone who is reading journals and attending lectures out of personal interest, but is no longer actively contributing to the profession, either through paid employment or volunteering of some kind, they would not be considered professionally active, and so would fall in the retired category. Now, if you're in doubt with regard to your own situation, then just contact us and we'll help you make the right decision between choice of options A and B. Moving on to slide 14 then, this describes option C. So again, I'll read the option statement. I do not wish to revalidate as I do not wish to continue to hold the Chartered Statistician Award beyond the 31st of December 2017. As indicated on the slide, if you select this option, it will be useful for the Society to know the primary reason for your decision. So we ask you to provide a brief comment. Now, our experience from the revalidation process in previous years is that a small number of members select this option because of a misunderstanding of the revalidation requirements. And we're keen to make sure that members only choose this option fully understanding the other options that are available. So in summary, we require the option choice A, B, or C by the end of March. And unfortunately, if no response is received, we will have to assume option C has been selected. Okay, so you've made your option choice, so let's return now and see what happens next in the process once we've got past the end of March deadline, and we see that on slide 15. So if you look at this slide around the middle, then we're going to talk now about the feedback and selection of audit sample stage, which is carried out in April. So in April, we will assess the CPUD returns from those who have selected option A. The feedback we will provide initially will be overall feedback on the quality of the set of CPD submissions that we've received. And once you've received this general feedback, if you would like specific feedback on your submission, just let us know and we'll provide it. We will also let you know whether or not you've been selected for audit, and if you've been selected, we'll provide guidance on what you need to do. Okay, so that's for those who've chosen option A. If you have selected option B, we will confirm receipt in April or before and indicate our response to your explanation of your circumstances. If you have indicated that you are on a career break or have extenuating circumstances, we will recommend an approach to possible deferment of your revalidation. And as mentioned earlier, deferment is likely to be a recommended course of action if your career break or extenuating circumstances are recent or current. If you have indicated that you are now permanently retired or have permanently moved away from a career in statistics, we will confirm receipt and update the professional register to reflect the fact that you are retired or have had a career change and so are not professionally active as a statistician. If you have selected option C, we will confirm receipt and confirm that your CStat status will cease at the end of the year. We will also clarify the possibility of reapplying for CStat status in the future. So if you are not selected for audit, the process completes for you at this point. And if you chose option A, your revalidation date will normally be reset to the 1st of January 2023. So let's now look at the audit process. And that can be found on slide 16. So slide 16 indicates the information that is requested from those selected for audit. So the aim here is to collect information from your CPD activities over the calendar years 2013 to 16, or a subset of these years. Now, I'll say a little bit more about that later. And to ensure that your program of CPD is in line with the expectation of the Society's CPD policy. So this slide has 4 panels, so I'll refer to each of them in turn, starting with the panel top left. So in particular, we're concerned to confirm that the CPD that you have undertaken is aligned with the needs of your current job role and or your career aspirations. So we ask for a career summary, which for most people can easily be extracted from their CV. So this doesn't need to be particularly extensive, maybe something of the order of half a page using a standard font size. The top right panel says CPD summaries from a subset of the years 2013 to 16. Now, if we follow the pattern of previous years, we will only require a summary for 2016, but suggest you submit other years' summaries as well as 2016 if that year is unrepresentative of your professional development. Note that you have submitted the 2016 summary in the initial step of the process, And we may give some suggestions for improving the information provided in your summary in order to ensure that the audit assessors have all the information they need. Now, the bottom left panel then, we also ask for you to reflect on how your program of CPD activities have supported the development of relevant skills, knowledge and experience, and how it has helped you to deliver to the customers of your services. So these customers might be project teams that you work in, clients that you do consultancy for, students whose research you support or who you teach, colleagues that you collaborate with, supervise or mentor. And the bottom right panel then, finally, we ask for a list of supporting information that could be provided to clarify or confirm the information that you have given. And note at this point, we just ask for a list of it. We don't ask you to provide it. It's just so we're aware of what we could ask for if necessary. The question of confidentiality often arises, and the information that you provide will be treated in the strictest confidence, and even for people working with confidential information in government or commercially confidential information in the private sector, we have found ways to overcome these concerns. We also provide the option for you to give a referee who is able to confirm your information rather than providing the assessment panel with access to confidential reports. But if you're in doubt about this, then again, get in contact and we can help find a pathway through any issues of confidentiality. Turning to slide 17, we mention the revalidation form on which we expect you to provide the information that was described on the previous slide. Using this template enables you to provide the information in a way that is efficient and useful for you and also for the panel of assessors. So the form has 7 sections, and the only one I have not talked about so far is the section on development planning. And this is included to simply encourage you to be thinking ahead about your future development needs. And note that the revalidation form described on this slide is already available to download from the web page given at the top of this slide. So to reiterate, if selected for audit, the audit submission will need to be provided by the end of June, and the panel of assessors will provide feedback by early September. Now, what I've focused on here, as well as the general revalidation process, are the specifics for the CStat revalidation process. So having talked in detail about that, let's now describe the differences between that process and the CSci revalidation process. And that's described on slide 18. So I'll step through this line by line. I'll do it relatively quickly because I think in essence we've mentioned most of these before, and we can always expand if you wish in the Q&A part. So the typical revalidation cycle for CStat process is 5 years, whereas the CSci process is an annual process. That's one difference. The CStat process runs in the first half of the year, so the dates that I mentioned relate to that, whereas the CSci process runs in the second half of the year, and the previous slides have shown what those corresponding dates are. The audit sample selection for the CStat process is primarily risk-based, whereas the CSci process is primarily random. And I can explain why that's the case later on if needed. The audit submissions for the CStat process may cover up to 4 years, whereas the CSci process covers only the prior 12 months period, because it is an annual process. And the annual CPD summaries for the CStat process are based on calendar years, whereas for the CPD summary for the CSci process, that runs from October, in this case 2016, through to September 2017. Now, if a member in the CStat process indicates that they've recently retired, then they switch status to retired, not professionally active. Whereas in the CSci process, you lose your CSci status and switch to the retired CStat status. And you lose it because the Science Council requires that you are professionally active in order to hold the CSci award. And if a member withdraws, i.e. chooses option C, or fails revalidation in the CStat process, then they lose their CStat status. Now, if you're in the CSci process, then you lose CSci status and drop into the CStat revalidation process in the subsequent year. So let's see how these differences have manifested themselves in the outcome of the revalidation processes covered over the past 3 years, starting with the CStat revalidation process. So looking now at slide 19. So on slide 19, you'll see the numbers of professionally active chartered statisticians in the first 3 cohorts undergoing revalidation in 2014, 15, and 16. Now, these were professionally active statisticians who received their CStat status prior to 2012, when the revalidation was introduced. So these cohorts included those who were awarded CStat status in 1993, when the award was initiated following the merger of the RSS and the Institute of Statisticians, and then in the subsequent years prior to the introduction of the CPD policy in 2004 and the following 7 or 8 years. Note that for now, we are discussing the process undertaken for those not holding the Chartered Scientist Award, and I'll come to that later. So the first row in this table indicates the number of professionally active CStats in the cohort undertaking revalidation, and this information is taken from the professional register in January, so captures numbers prior to the completion of the membership renewal and payment of subscriptions. So from the second row in the table, you will see that 3 to 8% of members chose not to renew, and in the subsequent table, it is the number in the final row of the table that is taken as the cohort size. And it should be noted that the introduction of revalidation has not led to an increase in the number of CStats defaulting at this stage. I think in the prior year, it was 6%. Now, slide 20 shows the outcome of the revalidation process for CStats over the 3-year period. The first row shows the number and percentage fully satisfying the revalidation requirements. The second row indicates the number partially satisfying the requirements, and the third row indicates the number for whom revalidation was deferred for 1 year due to extenuating circumstances. Thus, the first 3 rows indicate that in 2014, 76% continued as professionally active. In 2015, it was 68%, and in 2016, 56%. The next 2 rows indicate those who retained CStat status, but for whom their professional register entry was changed to indicate that they are not professionally active as statisticians. So a temporary state for those on a career break, but typically permanent for those undertaking a career change or moving into retirement. And from the final row in the table, it will be seen that those undertaking CStat revalidation process between 14 and 18% each year withdraw or fail revalidation, primarily because they fail to respond to multiple communications, but for some, because they contact us and indicate that they do not wish to continue to be chartered. So these figures include everyone, and the next slide shows the specifics for those who were audited. And that's slide 21, and the title should say the first 3 cohorts rather than the first 2 cohorts. So slide 21 summarizes the outcome of the audit process in the 3 years. The number selected for audit is about 10 to 15% of those eligible, and that is of those selecting option A. Those fully satisfying the audit requirements include members who were given feedback on improvement areas, and also one or two may have been asked to provide additional information before the final assessment was made by the panel. Those partially meeting the requirements were also given feedback on improvement, and also they were given reasons why they were not revalidated for a full 5 years. So they revalidated for between 1 and 3 years. We try to be supportive in the revalidation process, and for 2 members it became apparent during the audit process that it would be better to defer revalidation, in one case due to a career break and in other because of extenuating circumstances, and it also became apparent that retired status was appropriate for 1 member. So those indicated as failing declined to provide the requested information. So the final slide on looking at the outcome gives the corresponding information for the CSci revalidation process. Now note that in this case, this is on slide 22, in this case, successfully completing the process advances the revalidation date 12 months for both CSci and CStat. And note that the vast majority of members in the 2014 cohort are also included in the subsequent cohorts, and that those signing up for Chartered Scientist status from 2009 onwards were aware that there was a need for annual revalidation. So the first row shows the overall numbers in the cohorts, and that 95 to 98% successfully completed the process. And note that to retain CSci status, members must be professionally active, and so some of those who do not successfully complete the process fail because they cease to be professionally active. The subsequent rows show the outcome of the audit process carried out in each of the 3 years, and only 5 members failed the audit process over the 3 years due to failure to submit the requested information. Now, as previously mentioned, failure of the CSci revalidation process leads to ceasing to hold the CSci award. However, the CStat award is retained, and members switch into the CStat revalidation process or switch to one of the not professionally active CStat categories. Now, if they are professionally active, the new revalidation date will be dependent on the stage at which they withdraw from CSci status or fail revalidation, and also their audit history as part of the CSci process. Okay, so that's taken us through the outcome, and hopefully that's been useful to see what the possible outcomes are of the revalidation process. So now I'd like to just say a little bit more about continuing professional development, and this should take about another 5 or 10 minutes to the end of the presentation, taking us up to the hour, and then we can pause for a Q&A. So let's now move on to say a little bit more then, as I say, about continuing professional development, the recording of which and the summarising of which underpins revalidation. For CPD to be effective, it needs to be linked with your job role and or your career aspirations, and it's through the so-called CPD cycle that this is achieved. So if we look at slide 23 then, this outlines the cycle. Now, the revalidation process focuses on the action part, which is the lower panel on the slide, and the recording of the activities that have been undertaken, and the evaluation part on the left-hand side, the reflection on the outcome and benefit of activities. Now, this cycle points to the need to then move to assessing what you need to do next and then planning your future activities. So the evaluation and assessment can only really be effectively undertaken if you have documented what you have done. And so let's now talk about documenting or recording your CPD activities. Slide 24 is intended to do 2 things. Emphasize that the Society is quite happy for you to record your CPD in whatever way is most convenient for you, and to point out the requirements of the CPD policy of the Society. So you'll see in the left-hand panel then that two RSS recommended formats are suggested, or approaches. There is the online CPD system, which can be accessed through My RSS from the RSS website, and there is a template which can be downloaded from the RSS website. Now, the advantage of those approaches is that if you use those templates and the online system, then by necessity you provide the information which is required for the CPD policy of the Society. However, we're quite happy for you to use an approach you've developed personally. It might be an Excel spreadsheet that you find useful, or your employer's training records, if you have such a thing with your employer, or any other format. But if you're using a format other than those recommended by the RSS, then you may need to supplement the information to ensure that the information that's in the right-hand panel is provided. So in order to confirm compliance with the RSS CPD policy, we need to see that the activities you've undertaken cover at least 3 of the 5 categories of activity described in the policy, and that at least 60 learning hours have been undertaken in a 12-month period, and that you've reflected on the benefits of the activities, and that's recorded in your CPD summary. So you may be able, if you use an employer's one, it doesn't have that, you may just want to supplement it with that information. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the scope of CPD, because again, this is another area which just needs clarification. So the main point I want to make on slide 25 is that it is not restricted to the development of technical skills and knowledge. Typically, you need a broader set of knowledge and skill than just technical in order to ensure your input is relevant, makes an impact, and is effective. And your CPD summary should capture information across this whole area that I'm about to extend. So the technical foundation certainly should be included, but to be relevant, you need a knowledge of the context in which you're working. And this context knowledge involves any legal or regulatory framework that affects the sector in which you're working, any standards that are established by your sector or employer for how work gets done. In addition, it involves gaining and maintaining knowledge of the business setting in which you are working, whether it's the business of education, the business of government, the business of pharmaceutical R&D, of market research, of manufacturing automobiles, the business of operating as an independent statistical consultant. So whichever sector and way in which you're working, you need to understand that business setting. And developing knowledge in that area also contributes towards your CPD. And also, of course, knowledge of the scientific, medical, or social context in which data are collected, either by survey or experimentation. And to make an impact, you need the interpersonal skills to effectively communicate with co-workers and deliver your technical contribution. Now, many statisticians work in multidisciplinary teams, and in this context, your team working and leadership skills are valuable to ensure that the team as a whole delivers and that your statistical contribution enhances team performance and the quality of the team output. So finally then, at the top of the pyramid, depending on the size and nature of the organization you work in, there will be processes in place to support people and deliver tasks. And knowledge of these processes and skills to manage, facilitate, or operate within them can greatly increase the effectiveness of the contribution you can make. So to be specific, these processes include processes to appraise staff and set goals, mentor and coach colleagues, allocate resources to projects, manage project delivery, re-engineer the way that work gets done, implement and sustain change, solve problems, make decisions. So there's a lot of processes that, to be effective in an organization, you need to understand how the organization does these things. So CPD covers developing and maintaining knowledge, skill, and experience in all of these areas. Now the next slide, slide 26, I'm just trying to summarize in essence what we've been through there. So the summarize then, to indicate that professional development needs to be focused on increasing or maintaining technical competence, ensuring that your contribution is relevant, having the interpersonal skills to make an impact in making and implementing business decisions, and to be knowledgeable about the people and task processes that enable your contribution to be effectively delivered. So now let's just turn to the types of activity that you can undertake to achieve professional development. And these are the categories of activities that are recommended in the CPD policy of the Society. And this is given on slide 27. So in the appendix to the CPD policy, there is a definition of each of these categories and a series of examples of activities in each category. The principal value of the categorization is to demonstrate the broad range of activities that can be used to support your professional development. And two specific points to make here. Firstly, formal training sessions do contribute towards your CPD, but they are by no means the only way of doing so, and will typically make only a minor contribution to your overall CPD program. And secondly, do not forget the major contribution that work-based learning can make towards your CPD. Some people incorrectly totally ignore this category of learning, whereas others, equally incorrectly, list all activities that appear in their job description. Now, typically, it's the case that many activities in your job role do have a learning component, and it is legitimate to count these in your CPD summary. But in your CPD summary, you should describe the activity as not what you've done, but what you have done and learned. However, it is only a proportion of the time you spend on these activities that typically has a learning value, hence the concept of learning hours. And if you want to know more about that, again, have a browse through the CPD policy of the Society. It's worth saying here, though, that it is possible to make the case for a particular activity to fall in more than one category. So don't get hung up on the categorization. Just allocate an activity to a category you can justify. The key point is that you should be thinking of using the full range of activities available to you to support your professional development. Okay, so slide 18 then, we're in the home run here. What's available to support you? Well, the first panel here indicates the web pages on the website, which give details of the two revalidation processes that we've talked about today. The next two panels enable you to access the RSS Code of Conduct and the CPD policy of the Society. The next two panels, the bottom two, describe the RSS systems for recording CPD. So you can access the online recording system from the link given there or directly from my RSS, but indicated there that there is a video that demonstrates the use of the system, and the CPD activity summary can be downloaded from the link given in the final panel. Slide 29 then, some more support information. On the webpage CPD Profiles, there are 6 exemplars of CPD summaries that have been submitted for previous audit submissions. You may find 1 or 2 of them of help in indicating what we require from you. There's also some slides and extensive notes from a presentation given at a previous Professional Statisticians Forum meeting, which can be obtained from the link given there. You'll have to scroll down a little bit because this presentation was given in November 2012, so it's towards the bottom of the page, web page. And if you want further ideas about how the RSS can support you with professional development activities, then the third panel gives you a couple of links to go and have a look at. And finally then, a mention of the email address you can raise your questions at. So finally then, on slide 30, in summary, revalidation is a professional appraisal process introduced with the objective of raising the value of CStat and CSci award. It's intended to be a supportive process to encourage good professional practice. The intention is to minimize the extra work required from those managing their career progression as professional statisticians. It's a two-stage process, an initial submission by all, and additional information requested from a sample selected for audit. And as I say, if in doubt, contact us at that email address for clarification and support. On the way through, you'll notice that I mentioned that the audit sample is partly risk-based and partly randomly selected. And I just want to clarify that for you. And I mentioned that for the CStat process, it's probably the balance is more toward risk-based, and for the CSci sample, the balance is towards random. And what's the reason for that? Well, with the CStat revalidation process, there is an initial submission of CPD summaries. And those which don't provide us with the information to be confident that the CPD policy of the society is being followed, then those people we would typically include in the audit sample, and we would top it up with a random selection to make our 10 or 15% being audited. Whereas with the CSci revalidation process, at the initial stage, we don't ask for a CPD summary to be submitted. So those choosing option A in the CSci process just simply have to make a declaration. And so there are relatively few people who may be held over from the previous year who we've said, well, you haven't quite provided us what we need, but we're happy for you to carry on with the CSci award, but next year we'll audit you again and we'll have given you some advice on what we'd like to see, and so we'll call you for audit again. So relatively few people are in that category, so the vast majority of the sample for the CSci process will then be selected through a random process. So we do have a question, I think. So I will read it out because those just on the audit part won't have seen the question from Mark. Forgive me if I missed the early part of the meeting, but is the revalidation process started by the RSS contacting the member, or is the member expected to contact the RSS to kick off revalidation? No, the RSS contacts you. So if you're up for revalidation this year, then you will have received an email in the middle of January. I can't remember the exact date. I think it was probably mentioned on one of the slides. It might have been the 16th. But you'll have received an email. So sometimes they get put in your junk, so have a look in your junk email just to make sure that you've read the email or seen whether there is an email. And that email points you to the revalidation webpage, the appropriate one for you, and it also talks you through what the process will be for you during the year. As I mentioned, for the CStat revalidation process, it's in the first half of the year, that's when all the action takes place. And for the CSci revalidation process, it's in the second half of the year. So you'll get contacted again in August if you're in the CSci process to initiate the process. So thank you very much, and at that point we will close the session. So thank you for your participation, and I hope you come along to other professional statistician forums, be they webinars or face-to-face meetings. Thank you very much indeed.